Good morning, everyone. We are still in March, and March is Women's History Month. So, to help us celebrate, I wanted our close reading for today to be about women's history. So, this is an article from Scholastic News, and it's titled Fight for Women's Rights. 100 years ago, women in the United States won the right to vote, thanks to fearless leaders like Alice Paul. And we see a picture of Alice Paul here with a caption, "America's not a democracy. 20 million women are denied the right to vote." Alice Paul. I also see a timeline right down here, the fight for voting rights. These are a few milestones in the history of voting rights in the US. So milestones meaning they're going to tell me the big things that happen. Okay, we see another picture here. Mr. President, how long must women wait for liberty? The 1917 suffrage protest outside the White House lasted about 2 years. So we can already tell this is going to be a nonfiction text. So we can go ahead and mark the genre, nonfiction. I know we will be looking for main idea. Let's type that up. So we are reading a non-fiction text, but it is about a woman, Alice Paul, so we can revise this to say that we will be reading narrative nonfiction. So we will be looking for our character, specifically traits. We will be thinking, well, what are the main ideas that we're learning? What is the content vocabulary we will be learning? Which we can already hear some repeating words like suffrage, so I know that's going to be content vocabulary. Okay, we're also going to be paying attention to these text features, especially the timeline. Okay, and are we missing anything? We have character, main idea, content vocabulary, text features. Because this is narrative nonfiction, we're going to add lesson. Okay, oopsie. Okay, anything else? Oh, author's craft. Can't forget that. Okay, great. So we have our lens set up. Let's go ahead and start reading. Alice Paul sat in a jail cell in Virginia. The year was 1917. The cell was filthy. The blanket on the bed hadn't been washed in months, and the food at the jail was crawling with bugs. Paul's crime? She thought women should be allowed to vote. Already we see a hook. Women in the United States didn't always have that right. Activists like Paul helped change that, but it took decades of struggle. And an activist, we know right down here it says, people who act to try to bring about change, because she wanted to bring change, where it all began. Paul was born in 1885. Her family belonged to a religious group called the Quakers. They believed that men and women were equals. At the time, not many others shared that view. Paul often tagged along with her mother to women's suffrage meetings. Suffrage, I see that's highlighted. Let's look at the definition. Suffrage, the right to vote. So she knew that women weren't being represented well by the government. How could they be if they weren't allowed to vote for their leaders? Paul's childhood set the stage for her life's work. After college, she began a leader in the American women's suffrage movement. In March of 1913, Paul helped organize a protest parade in Washington, D.C. More than 5,000 women marched in the parade. Thousands of men and kids also showed their support, but others were there for a different reason. They disagreed with Paul's views. Angry onlookers hit, tripped, and yelled at the marchers. But it didn't stop them. The parade brought visibility to the suffrage movement, says Krista Niles. She worked at the Alice Paul Institute. A tough battle. Over the next few years, Paul wrote letters to Congress, gave speeches, and spread the word about her cause. Then, in 1917, she organized a group of more than 1,000 women to protest at the White House. No one had ever dared to protest outside the president's home before. For 8 hours a day, rain or shine, the women stood silently outside the White House gates. holding signs. Paul insisted that the protests remain non-violent. After a few months, police began to arrest the women, although they were standing quietly on the sidewalk. More than 200 suffragists were charged with blocking traffic. That's how Paul ended up in the filthy jail cell. Wait a second, I'm seeing that this part's connecting right back to the beginning. So the author starts off the text by giving us that narrative, and it goes right back over here. We see the beginning of that narrative. Okay, and something else that I'm noticing is I'm getting a lot of her actions. So she rallied up her group to protest outside of the White House, and that had never been done before. So not only is she determined to bring light to these important issues, but she also was very brave to get all of this started, winning the vote. As word spread about their imprisonment, there was a public outcry. The women were eventually released. More importantly, they could no longer be ignored. Feeling pressured, President Woodrow Wilson announced his support for women's suffrage in 1918. 2 years later, the 19th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was approved, finally granting women in the U.S. the right to vote. Paul spent the rest of her life, right up until her death in 1977, fighting for equal rights. Alice Paul believed that one person can make a difference. Niles says, "You don't have to be wealthy or famous. It comes down to your personal courage." What an inspiring and amazing read. So I want to challenge you guys to go ahead and reread the text again so that you can really pay attention to the actions of Paul, and also so that you can take your time to really read this timeline down here that gives us some milestones, and then you'll have some questions to answer. Good luck, guys.